The downturn in oil and natural gas prices continues to ripple through Oklahoma's economy. According to the Bureau of Economic Analysis, Oklahoma suffered a decline in the state's gross domestic product of minus 2.4% during the second quarter. That's dead last among the 50 states and the District of Columbia. Economists say the outlook for 2016 also looks bleak. That poses challenges for state lawmakers who are expected to face a budget hole that analysts predict could top $1 billion in the coming fiscal year.
The picture painted at the 2016 Oklahoma Economic Outlook Conference this week was a dark one. Oklahoma State University economics professor Dan Rickman says while Oklahoma's unemployment rate remains low and some sectors will benefit from an expanding national economy, the energy sector will continue to be a drag on Oklahoma's economy.
Until we work through the excess supply in the energy market and prices stabilize, we can expect continued fallout from that sector to depress overall growth.
While Rickman expects non-farm employment will rise by more than 2,000 jobs, and the healthcare and social assistance sectors will gain more than 3,000, that will be more than offset by a loss of more than 6,000 jobs in the energy sector next year. He also warns against expecting a recovery in oil prices anytime soon.
They're going to struggle for a while where we're at and maybe even test the lows that we had before because we have a supply that exceeds demand, and the supply is being very sluggish in responding to these low prices.
That creates major problems for state officials tasked with crafting a budget for state government. Oklahoma State Treasurer Ken Miller told those attending this week's conference that the downturn in the energy industry and the decline in gross production tax receipts has left the state's general revenue fund feeling the strain.
With fiscal year-to-date allocations 2.8% below the estimate, the specter of a revenue failure during the current fiscal year is now considered a possibility.
While losses in the energy sector are the most visible sign of economic distress, Miller says Oklahoma's budget-making process has another problem: the continued reliance on non-recurring revenue, such as the Unclaimed Property Fund, agency revolving funds, and the State Rainy Day Fund, to pay recurring expenses. While budget leaders began phasing out the use of one-time funds 2 years ago, Miller says the state reverted to the practice to cover this year's $611 million budget shortfall, and he expects the same will happen again next year. State Finance Secretary Preston Dorflinger agrees the state should reduce its reliance on one-time funds, but argues a bigger problem is so-called off-the-top spending, with revenue dedicated to several agencies before lawmakers have a chance to appropriate it.
There are many constituency groups who like the fact that they have dedicated revenue, but the problem is that it takes away the flexibility of the sitting members of the legislature to meet the needs of the day.
But Miller says dedicated funding for things like roads and bridges or the Oklahoma Promise Scholarship Program isn't the real problem.
A lot of these would have to be funded anyway, but I think any time that you have to add $300 to $400 million of alternative sources of revenue to the certified revenue, that is de facto admittance that you don't have enough revenue to fund the government services that you desire to fund.
Miller also points to the fiscal impact created by legislation to cut the state's personal income tax rate from 5.25% to 5%.
So if you want to reduce the income tax, you need to reduce spending, or you need to reduce business incentives to match. So the days where we can just reduce the income tax and expect the revenues to magically appear for some other reason is just past, and we need to get serious about recurring revenues matching recurring expenditures.
Despite the projected budget hole, Dorflinger says the tax cut will almost certainly remain in effect.
I think that the legislature and the governor, again, believe that there's a fine line between the tax-paying citizens of the state being able to keep more of their hard-earned dollar and having the resources to be able to run state government. So no, I don't think that there'll be any discussion about rolling back the income tax cut.
The tax cut took about $50 million out of the current fiscal year budget, and the impact is expected to be around $150 million during the next fiscal year.